Not so many years ago, if you were to take a drive across America's farmland and through the countryside, if by chance your ride should happen as the day was nearly done, most every farmstead on the road would have the barn lights on. The farmer and a kid or two, or maybe even more, each one busy with a task, doing up the evening chores. Milk the cow, feed the chickens, gather up the eggs, throw some hay down from the loft, and water the sow and pigs. Sometimes my mind will wander back, and I'll recall those days now gone, of peaceful winter evenings and the lights on in the barn. The smell of all the cattle mixed with the grain and hay. To me, it was a pleasing smell, though to you, it may not sound that way. And while filling up the water tank, I'd watch the cats at play. A nearly perfect ending to another busy day. Then gazing toward the house, I could see the kitchen light. Mama's fixin' supper to feed us all tonight. And the warm glow from that window made this country boy work hard to get into that apple pie and that chicken fried in lard. But the trend today is larger and fewer family farms. Not so many places left now with the lights on in the barn. They tell us that it's progress and nothing stays the same. We must look toward the future and not the past from where we came. And I know that is true, but tell me, what's the harm? If I feel a twinge of sadness 'cause there's no lights on in the barn. Everything is getting big and no one seems alarmed that the chickens and the hogs now are mostly raised on factory farms. We've taken out the fences and the barn, it's been torn down. Takes a lot of room to turn 16 rows around. My favorite memories take me back to the way we used to farm, to a peaceful winter evening with the lights on in the barn. It's hard work being a farmer. That's why there is such pride in a beautiful field of crops. All across America, that pride shows. Until you reach Cocklebur County and Ragweed Ranch, home of the world's worst farmer. Yes, there really is a world's worst farmer, and his name is Louis Baumgartner.
Well, I do claim to be the world's worst farmer. That's right, the absolutely, positively poorest farmer on the face of the earth. And I'll be honest with you, that's not just my opinion. I have got a banker and several neighbors that will all vouch for me. But I consider myself first and foremost a farmer, and I farm because that's what I like to do. I'm not in it just for the big money. But you know, I think another one of my problems is this little theory that I seem to subscribe to, and this code that I operate under, that says anything that's pretty close is good enough. You know, like, that gate wasn't quite wide enough for that disc. But it was pretty close. But then one day, as dogs will do, a dog took off after a rabbit, chased it across the backyard, down around behind the barn, into a lot plumb full of cattle, spooked them, run them through a brand new plank fence, tore up a gate. Luckily, though, it was not the one that swings. So I put up this electric wire, just temporary, till I could get that little stretch of fence built back. And late that night, I walked down around behind the corner of the barn like I do every night right before I go to bed. Yeah. I forgot about that hot wire. I'll tell you, that was one time that I would have give $100 to have just been pretty close.
Since 1987, Louis Baumgartner has entertained hundreds of groups, conventions, and meetings. Some called him Missouri's answer to Green Acres. Others recalled Minnie Pearl, Jerry Clower, or Andy Griffith. But Louis was just glad they called and laughed.
Here not too long ago, a fella from over in Nebraska asked me, said, what does good farmland sell for down in Cockleboro County? And I said, well, good farmland, I wouldn't really know because we don't have any. The only black dirt we got is where we drain the oil out of the tractor. But I gotta tell you, I had a little bit of a humiliating experience there one morning. I was sitting there at the breakfast table one morning, and I had a cup of coffee, and I was looking out the window and just kind of staring off down the road and not paying any attention to anything in particular. And pretty soon I saw my seed corn salesman stop down there alongside of the road, and he got out of his pickup and walked over along by my cornfield and looked out over my crop and then reached down and took his little sign off my fence. But I tell you, that old boy, he's quite a character anyway. He asked me one day, said, Louis, would you help me out just a little bit? And I said, well, sure, I'd be glad to. What do you want me to do? He gave me one of his competitors' caps, said, here, wear this. But you know, the word for today in farming, or we hear a lot of experts or so-called experts down in our neck of the woods stand up and say, what you fellas need to do is diversify. You need to diversify and plant some of the alternate, the high-profit, labor-intensive crops. Well, I was listening pretty close till the fellow said labor-intensive. And then I decided, well, maybe that program wouldn't work on my farm. But I've got a neighbor that tried one of these crops, and he was getting along real good with it, and it looked good all summer long. And then, as luck would have it, right before he made his first harvest, the sheriff found it and cut it all down. And then we got this one old couple out there, Ben and Pauline. Now, Ben and Pauline have lived out on the same old farm all their married life. Never done anything very big, never made much money, but they never spent any money at all. And here not too long ago, there was an 80 acres that joined in that come up for sale. And Ben and Pauline had wanted this 80 acres for a long time. And the price on it was $1,000 an acre. And that was considerable more than they'd give for the original farm, but they decided they wanted this 80, they were going to buy it. So they got with the owners and they made a deal with them, and come the day to settle up on this piece of property. And all the concerned parties met in town at the local bank, and they were all upstairs in the boardroom, seated around the big table. They were signing all the necessary papers, and pretty soon it come time for Ben and Pauline to pay for this 80 acres. Old Ben, he just reached down beside of his chair and picked up a brown paper bag and dumped it out on the table. Cold, hard cash. Well, they started counting it, and they counted through it. They come up $75,000. And Ben said, well, we must have miscounted because I know it's all there. So they counted it again, $75,000. Well, Ben began to look a little flustered and a little embarrassed, and as most men will do when they're lost and don't know what to do next, he looked over at his wife for instructions. And she looked up at him and she said, Paul, you brought the wrong sack. Don't you just hate it when that happens? It seems like that whenever anything gets to bothering me, or I get to worrying about something, I can go on the back of my place, and back there I can just shut out the rest of the world, and I can forget about my problems, and I can really relax just sitting on the back of the farm. And to give you an idea, I was back there one day last fall, completely on the back of the place, far away from the house as I could get. And I was back there sitting in the pickup and watching the cattle graze and enjoying the nice fall weather. It was one of those really beautiful autumn days. And, I guess I probably sat there watching those cattle graze for, an hour or more. And it finally dawned on me, these are not my cattle. And we've got a lot of interesting folks there around Millersburg. We got this one lady, for instance, this one elderly lady. Now, she had just always dressed to the nines and just got her hair fixed perfect, and every time she steps out the door, now she just looks perfect. And she knows it, too. She is very much aware of her looks, and she is quite proud of her looks. Well, she was walking down the street there in Millersburg one morning, and she met this old gentleman, and real polite like, he tipped his hat and said, "Why, good morning, Miss Isabel. May I say you're looking lovely this morning?" And in a very pompous way, Miss Isabel said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Townsend. I wish I could say the same for you." And he said, "Well, you could if you're as big a liar as I am." And then we got these two old boys out there, Earl and Raymond. Now, Earl and Raymond like to nip a little bit. Well, to be honest with you, Earl and Raymond like to nip a whole lot. And they were sitting there in a tavern in Millersburg one night, and there was a television up over the bar had the 10 o'clock news on. And on the news, there was this fella standing on a ledge about ready to jump. Well, Earl turned to Raymond and says, "Raymond, I'll bet you $5 that guy jumps off that ledge." Raymond said, "You're on. I'll bet you $5 you don't jump." Oh, excuse me. Well, no sooner had Raymond said that than fella bailed off the ledge. Raymond, he got his $5 out and he went to pay up, and old Earl said, "You know, Raymond, I can't really with a clear conscience take your money, because I saw the news at 6 o'clock and I knew he was going to jump." And Raymond said, "Well, I saw the news at 6 o'clock too, but I didn't think that damn fool would jump again." But you know, I try to look at my problems with a sense of humor and try to be optimistic. I think there's enough pessimism in this old world, and I think we need to be optimistic about what we're doing, and I try to be an optimist, and I try to look on the bright side of every situation. And I got a little nephew that taught me a lesson about looking on the bright side of any situation. And the way this happened, it was my little nephew Mike, and he went out one day to play ball by himself. And he had a bat and a ball, and I was standing there watching him. He pitched the ball up, and he swung at it, and he missed it. Well, he pitched it up again, he swung at it, and he missed it again. Well, he went ahead, and he pitched it up a third time. He took a mighty cut, and he missed it again, strike 3. And I was standing there thinking, I bet little Mike is getting pretty discouraged about this ball game by now. And directly he just shook his head and said, "Boy, I must be a hell of a pitcher." And then, as I was telling you earlier about the old junk machinery that I try to operate with, I parked my tractor out next to the road one night. Somebody come along in the middle of the night and stole it. Next night, he brought it back. And he left a little note on it that said, "You better get this thing fixed before it hurts somebody." But it's really not that bad. I'll admit, it looks pretty rough. It's got a big dent right up across the hood where a limb fell off my machine shed on it. Am I going a little too fast for this bunch? But you know, as tough as I've had it, though, out there on the farm, I got an idea last summer for a brand new career that I've been giving some serious thought to. And the way this happened, I was set up out at the county fair. And I had a booth set up out there, and all it amounted to was just a folding table. And what I was doing out there, I was trying to sell pole buildings. My son and I used to put up some pole buildings. And I was out at the fair trying to push these buildings and really doing more visiting than I was anything else. But I've got a stack of flyers printed up that advertise my speaking service. And they say world's worst farmer, and they got my pretty picture up in one corner, and I had a bunch of these flyers laying on the corner of this table. And this man and woman and this little old boy come walking by. And I'd say this little guy was maybe 8 or 9 years old, but he walked up that table and he looked down at those flyers, and then he looked up at me and he said, "Is this you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "How come?" I said, "You mean how come I'm the world's worst farmer?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I don't know. I just wasn't good at it. I just couldn't cut the mustard." And he looked down at those flyers again, and he looked up at me and just as serious said, "Well, then are you running for Congress?" Well, I'd like to finish up my part of the program tonight by doing a few poems for you, if I may. I usually write the poems when I'm out in the field working on the tractor or the combine. Kind of gives me something to think about while I'm waiting for the next breakdown. So most of my poems are short ones. But the first one that I would like to do for you, I'm real proud of, because this is the first and only thing that I've ever written with anything like a serious thought or a message to it. And the title of this poem is Old Bill. And Bill was a farmer that lived the next place to us when I was growing up. And he had a little shop. He was a good mechanic and always working on a piece of machinery, either for himself or, likely as not, as a favor for some neighbor. And it just seemed like I was over there all the time, and I really looked up to Bill. And he was the inspiration for this poem. And this just might jog a memory of an old Bill in your path, because almost everybody has an old Bill. And there's a lesson in this poem for all of us, and I hope you enjoy it. Old Bill. I'm going to see old Bill someday. I always said but never did. Old Bill was the best pal I had when I was just a kid. He used to tell me stories about places near and far, and old Bill knew everything there was to know about a car. And old Bill always understood when I talked of troubles that I had, and I'd tell things to Bill that I wouldn't tell my dad. I'd ride my bike to his place nearly every day. I thought I was helping out, but I was probably in the way. But old Bill never seemed to mind, though he'd often say to me, "Boy, you'll never amount to nothing, that's pretty plain to see." And sometimes he would tell me, "Boy, I'm busy here today. I ain't got time to fool with you, just stay out of the way." But if a couple of days went by and I hadn't been around, well, he'd call to see if I was sick and say, "Boy, I thought you'd drowned." Well, I used to help him on his farm, planting corn, baling hay, because I knew when the job was done that I'd be sure to get some pay. And he'd do things for me, and of course I never paid a dime. He'd just say, "We'll let it go and I'll charge you double next time." Well, then I grew to be a man and I left old Bill behind. I never went to see him much, I just didn't have the time. Well, then old Bill grew old and his health was getting bad. And at last they put him in a home, and I thought then, how sad. I'm going by and see old Bill, I'd often tell my wife, just to tell him thanks for his part in my life. Just to chat with him and visit and help him pass the lonely day. Yeah, I'm going by and see old Bill the first time I'm out that way. And his daughter told my wife that he often speaks of me. Yeah, I got to get by and see old Bill when I get some time that's free. Well, I went to see old Bill today at his final resting place. And as I thought about those years gone by, the tears streamed down my face. Yes, I cried a lot of tears today, but not just because Bill was dead. The tears I cried were tears of shame for the things I'd left unsaid. Oh, why do we in our busy life just never find the time to cheer the heart of some dear friend that the years have left behind? Oh, if I ever get the chance, and I hope someday I will, I pray that I'll be man enough to be some boy's old Bill.
On June 19th at 1 p.m., that life changed. Lewis collapsed. A couple of days later, in intensive care, he spoke his first word, "Well." They moved him to a new room, and he expanded his talk with, "What the heck happened?" We are all getting old. Lewis was too. He was only 59, but had already had 6-way bypass heart surgery. Now he'd had a stroke. Many people die from strokes. Many times, they should not. Lewis didn't. This might be a good time for all of us to think about the warning signs of a stroke. They are sudden numbness or weakness of the face or an arm or leg, especially on one side of the body. Sudden confusion, trouble speaking or understanding. Sudden trouble walking, dizziness or loss of balance and coordination. Or a sudden and severe headache with no known cause. There are very good medical treatments for strokes, but you need to act fast. Remember, fast. Check the person's face. Ask the person to smile. Does one side of the face droop? Check their arms. Ask the person to raise both arms. Does one arm drift downward? Check their speech. Ask the person to repeat a simple phrase. Mary had a little lamb. Is their speech slurred or strange? Time is of the essence. If you see any of these signs, call 911. If you are the one experiencing these signs, don't argue. Don't resist those who are trying to help. Call 911 immediately. The medical help for strokes is time sensitive. The world doesn't stop for folks who've had a stroke, but recovery is slow. Small steps are the rule. After his stroke, Lewis spent 6 weeks in the hospital with physical and speech therapy, relearning the basics. He'd come a long way when he got to go to the coffee shop again. And getting to see all the guys again was great.
Unfortunately, no one said I was good looking, just that I was looking good.
Lewis' sense of humor was back, and he attributes the confidence and optimism of his therapists for that. December 2007 was another milestone. Over the years, Lewis had become a valued asset to the USDA as their #1 bad example. So the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service booked him to talk.
I knew this was going to be a good day for me when my neighbor called me up real early this morning and said, "Hey, Bumgarner, I got a big surprise for you. All your cows are in." Millersburg is just a spot on the road as a definition of a one-horse town. But even though we're small, we'd like to thank ourselves as progressive and forward-looking. As a matter of fact, we are getting right now in Millersburg ready to put in our first stoplight. And we're so proud of that. We haven't got it bought yet, but we've got the colors all picked out. On Sunday afternoon, there's a creek that runs up the backside of Raymond's farm, and he was just meandered along this creek, making his way home. And he come up on a bunch of Baptists, have the baptizing ceremony right out in this creek. Raymond, he just walked to him too, right out in the water. And this Baptist preacher, he was put it pretty well on a roll, and he put his arm around Raymond's shoulder, and he said, "Sir, would you like to find Jesus?" And Raymond said, "Yes, I would." So the old preacher jumped in under the water, and you raised him back up and said, "Now, did you find Jesus?" And Raymond said, "No, I didn't." And the old preacher dumped him under, he held him under for 10 or 15 seconds, and I jerked him back up and said, "Now, did you find Jesus this time?" And Raymond said, "No." "Are you sure this was before he fell in?" And old Raymond, his tractor rolled down the hill, and the brake gave away on it, and it rolled down the hill and rolled into a tree. and done quite a bit of damage to it. And Raymond was in insurance office one day and speaking to the insurance about it. And the insurance agent said, well, Raymond, that tractor's not covered for that. It's only covered for fire. It's only covered if it burns up. And Raymond said, I'll be back in a couple hours. Well, we bought our farm back in 1979. And that was just about the perfect time to buy a farm. If you didn't want a farm too long anyway. But we've been out there now for about 28 years, a little better in 28 years, and we are coming along a little bit and making a little bit of progress on the thing. And we bought the farm in '79. We give $1,000 an acre for it. And now we've got it paid down to $1,200. My wife and I have been married for 31 years, and she with me today, and my daughters too. And we've had a real good marriage, and just had very few problems. We get along great, but it's not all been a bed of roses. We have our little spats now and then. Everybody does. And this happened to me just last week. I won this argument. I got in the last word. I was so proud of myself. And very unusual, before it was all over, she come to me. She come to me on her hands and knees and looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, come out from under that bed, you coward.
Louis Baumgartner may be the world's worst at farming, but he's pretty darn good at keeping us smiling. Stroke has not been the end for Louis Baumgartner, nor does it need to be for others who have had major life changes. Faith, hope, and love. Faith in tomorrow, a hope that is willing to work, and love for and the love of those around us can make all of life a treasure.
We need to laugh a little more, and I appreciate your kind attention and your laughter, and I think sometimes we take life a little bit too serious, and I don't think life was meant to be a drudgery or meant to be a chore. I think life was meant to be enjoyed, and I think to do that, we need to laugh a little more. And my theory is kind of this. If I laugh at myself first, I beat the neighbors to it. Well, this is the world's worst farmer urging you to plant the seeds of friendship, fertilize with kindness and understanding, cultivate with a sense of humor, and you'll harvest a happy and successful life. If you're not the best audience I ever had, you're pretty close. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.